No, you don't have to leave. No, I'd like you to stay, actually. I just don't want to.
You just remembered about a story you want to tell us, a turn the screw.
Well, yeah. Now, this story has very little to do with the technique of this. Yeah, I'll start it again. Well, yeah, this story has very little to do with the technique of how to direct a live television show, but I think since we're doing this for the archives, it should be in there. I had to meet Ingrid Bergman. She wanted to meet me because she wasn't really convinced that she wanted to do this whole thing. It was a huge, big challenge for her. And her agent at the time was a woman named Kay Brown. And Kay Brown said, well, what you're going to have to do, and I'll go over with you, we're going to have to go to Sweden to meet Ingrid. And I said, fine. So I was kind of going to be approved by her. And she wanted to know how I wanted to do the show and so forth. Because she lived in Europe. She didn't know anything I did. She had seen a few kinescopes of stuff I'd done. So we get on this plane, we go to Paris, and we have to change planes, and we have to go to Göteborg, which is in the southern part of Sweden, and it's already freezing cold there. We land, and I then find that Ingrid Bergman lives on an island in the North Sea off the coast of Göteborg. And her then husband, Lars Schmidt, meets us with a speedboat, and we plow through the waves, and the spray is coming over the North Sea. It's cold as hell. And we get there, and there's this rock. It's a rock, and she lives on this rock, and she has this house there, and suddenly coming out of the house to meet me is Ingrid Bergman, and she looks like Ingrid Bergman. God, she was beautiful. And I was 29, so at the time she had to be in her middle to late 30s, probably late 30s, 37, 38. And she looked fabulous. And she was so gracious, and she said, well, she said, you must be so tired. She had this great Swedish accent, which I can't do, but she said, you must be so tired. She said, maybe what you should do, she said, before we talk, before anything, she said, you should probably go take a sauna. So I said, fine. So she showed me where the sauna was. Now, as I said, this was a rock. So the sauna was right next to this dock, by the North Sea. It's important to remember that. And the North Sea was really cold. I mean, anytime it's cold, but it's not called the North Sea because it's warm, So I go into the sauna, and I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking, and obviously you can go into the sauna, you don't have anything on. Do you have a cutaway? Do you have anything to cut to?
No, but you're on.
So you're just going to jump cut me?
Right.
So she said, maybe you should take a sauna. And the sauna was right next to the dock, which was right next to which obviously gave onto the North Sea. And so I go into the sauna, and I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking, I'm stark naked, obviously, and I'm thinking about, God, here I am. It's Ingrid Bergman, and God Almighty, who would have ever thought? And suddenly the door of the sauna opens, and she walks in with a robe, and she said, I thought maybe I would join you. And so she sits over there, and she takes the robe off, and she is stark naked, sitting over there, between me and the door. And I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking, oh my God, if this happens, and certain things were starting to happen. I mean, she really looked great. And certain things are starting to happen. And I thought, this is going to be a disgrace if this happens. A disgrace. So I kind of cupped my hands like this, and I got up, bent over, and I ran out, and I jumped into the North Sea. Jump into the North Sea. It's below zero in the North Sea. I hate cold water anyway. Of course, I came out of the North Sea, and I couldn't tell if I was a man or a woman by the time I come out. So I go over, and I sit down, and I start to talk to her again. Well, I was 29 years old. In about 10 minutes, these same feelings are coming back. Anyway, I went in and out of the North Sea 5 times. After about the 3rd time, she said, you must really like the cold water. I said, I love it. I love it. Anyway,
So she approved you as a director.
She did, but I think it had nothing to do with, years later, after she'd had a double mastectomy and she was dying from cancer, I told her that story, and she started to cry. I did too. Then. But I just think you should have the story.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Let's go on.
Let's move back to Birdman, and then Manchurian Candidate. How did you started to say earlier how you got involved in Manchurian Candidate?
Well, the way I got involved with Manchurian Candidate was that George Axelrod and I, during Breakfast at Tiffany's, he wrote the script. He and I became great friends because we worked very hard together on the script. And when I was fired from the picture, he thought it was really a very bad deal I got, and he said, I'd really love to work with you. And then one thing led to another, and we stayed in touch, and he suggested we both read a book by Richard Condon called The Manchurian Candidate, which had been turned down by every studio in town. I read it. I loved it. He did. We bought it. We got Sinatra. And once we got Sinatra, UA made the movie.
I'm sure you've been asked this many times. How was Sinatra to work with?
He was great. But, you know, Michael, obviously we could do a whole hour on Manchurian Candidate, and it really doesn't have much to do with the archives.
Well, what I do want to get to in Manchurian Candidate is to ask you the characters of the senator, and the storylines. When I watch that, I see similarities to how really Joseph McCarthy was covered in television, and I wondered whether that was an influence anywhere along the way.
Well, of course, it was the first picture. It was the first motion picture to take on McCarthy. It really was. It was quite bold. That's why nobody had wanted to touch it all those years. And yes, my live television training came to the fore there. When I did the press conference, I actually had live television cameras in the room, and I was in the truck directing the press conference on live television. And that was what was broadcast on the monitors. And the motion picture camera hardly moves at all. But it's all the movement on the monitors, which I did with the live TV cameras. So I did the same thing in 7 Days in May.
And I also, one thing about that film too is, of course, that famous scene where you do the 360. And it goes back to what I was asking earlier, is the transition of taking the audience from one scene to the next without cutting or without the illusion of cutting. And I wanted to ask you about that as well.
Well, the scene in which you're talking to which you're referring is the first flashback scene, the dream, when Sinatra imagines himself in a hotel in New Jersey, and in reality he's in an auditorium in Manchuria. And we had this problem as to how to really make the audience know this thing is a dream and to really suck them into it. And I had a brilliant production designer named Richard Silbert who really helped me a lot on that picture. And we talked about how to do it. And we thought, wow, if we could get from that hotel in New Jersey to that auditorium in Manchuria without cutting, that would be a real stunt. Of course, today you could just do it with a computer. Just absolutely morph it right in. But we didn't have anything like that then. So what Dick did was design a set where the back of the hotel lobby was on a railroad track. And over here, which you couldn't see, was the back of the Manchurian auditorium. So as the camera left Helen Klebe, who was the speaker, the woman speaker, started down here, of course we cut the sound, and all the actors just jumped off the platform in the New Jersey hotel. The stagehands moved the set on the railroad track, and boom, the Manchurian auditorium came into play. And the actors jumped up, and the secretary of the hotel gave way to Henry Silva, and we came around, and lo and behold, there they are on the other stage. And it's Kaidi talking, the psychiatrist. And after he just said the first few lines, we cut, because then we could do anything we wanted. That's how that happened.
Was that scene in the script, or written that way? Or
No, not written that way, because George Axelrod and I worked on it together. I didn't figure out how to do it. Yeah, before we started to shoot it, we wrote it that way so that everybody would know what it was.
But that evolved out of the process with you and Axel.
Oh, it evolved out of the process of Axelrod, myself, and Richard Silbert. Yeah.
We obviously don't have time to talk about your film work today, but I wanted to ask you, in 1968, you met Robert F. Kennedy.
I did.
And I wanted to ask you how you met and what your impressions were.
Well, in 1960, when John Kennedy was running, I was a very, very well-known television director, as we know. And I was asked to do commercials and stuff for John Kennedy, just to donate my time. And I didn't do it through a series of circumstances. I was going through a divorce. It was a very bad time for me. And like people do, I just found reasons not to do it. And of course, after everything happened, I felt awful that I hadn't done it. And when his brother announced his candidacy, I wanted to be part of that. I call it guilt, call it whatever you want. And Pierre Salinger and I had gotten to know each other through the years, through 7 Days in May and through Manchurian, because the president loved Manchurian Candidate and was very cooperative in the making of 7 Days in May. And so I called Pierre, and he said, it's great to hear from you. Actually, I was living in California then. He said, the candidate will be at the Sportsman's Lodge over in the Valley tomorrow night. If you want to come over, and I'll introduce you. And I went over there, and we had a very pleasant back and forth thing. Senator, Mr. Frankenheimer, blah, blah, blah. And I got back to my house and said, and Pierre called and said he liked you a lot. He said he's going to go out to Gary, Indiana tomorrow to do a debate with some high school students, and he's got to do a speech for TV. He said, you want to go and do it? And right there, it's a decision you make in your life. You say no, you know they'll never call you again. And so you just suck it up and say yes. So I got on a plane, and I went to Gary, Indiana, and I did the high school debate, and then came time to do his speech. And he said, well, I have 5 minutes to do this speech, and I have to go. I said, well, then why did you have me come all the way out here from California to do the speech if you have 5 minutes to do it? And he said, well, I didn't even know that, he said, I just have 5 minutes to do it. So we did it at the end of 5 minutes. And he said, okay? And I said, no, it's terrible. And his wife was in the control room, too. That was Dick Goodwin. And he said, what? And I said, why don't you come up here and we'll talk about it? And he came up and he said, what do you mean it's terrible? I said, it's awful. I said, you look like a gangster. You look cruel and you look nervous. And she said, Bobby, he's right. Why don't you listen to him? He said, okay, well, what do I have to do? I said, what you have to do is, let's work on this. He said, well, how long will it take? I said, until it's right. Well, 3 hours later, we had it. And I said thank you to everybody, and I went out to get in my car to drive to the airport. And as I was getting in my car, Dick Goodwin came out, and he said, Dick Goodwin was the head guy, the writer and all that. He said, look, he said, he really liked you a lot, and we've got to go from here to Michigan tomorrow. Will you come? I said, yeah, I'd love to. Anyway, I ended up doing all his film and television for his entire campaign. And it was all film, not live at all.
16 or 35?
16. We had our own crews. I finally got news crews because my guys couldn't get in there. I mean, the news crews would just bump them out of the way. And I did it all, and I edited the stuff, and he was staying at my house, and I drove him to the Ambassador Hotel the night he was shot. It was a very traumatic time in my life, but he was a man who I think if he had lived and become president, a lot of things that happened in this country after 1968 would not have happened.
So how long was the total time that you spent with him?
102 days.
His personality away from the cameras, drastically different than?
Yeah, I mean, not drastically different, but different enough, yeah.
Have you seen those commercials since? Are they still around?
Well, they weren't just commercials. I mean, some of them were like 45-minute films and stuff. Yeah, I have. The Museum of Television and Radio has one on the Nebraska primary. I know that. I did 45 minutes.
I want to jump up to 1982. You returned to television for The Rainmaker for HBO.
No.
How did you return back to television and why?
Well, again, it was, I don't want to go into a lot of personal things here. It was a very bad time in my life. And I was asked by Paramount Television to do a adaptation of Richard Nash's play, The Rainmaker, with Tommy Lee Jones and Tuesday Weld. I had worked with Tuesday before, and I liked the play, and they had already designed the set, which I thought was terrible. And we did it, we rehearsed it, and we actually did it like a live-on-tape situation. The crew had never worked that way before. It was interesting for them. But it was all right. I mean, I don't think it was a huge triumph in any way. I mean, it was kind of really easy for me to do. And I did it.
Everyone knows now HBO as being a powerhouse cable network, and the latitude they give the filmmakers. In '82, they were just beginning. Did you feel support, or were you given latitude?
Well, you're not given latitude now at HBO, so let's not confuse things. Well, yeah, I mean, you make your own latitude, Michael.
I guess the choice of material can be riskier than compared to other.
Well, look, I mean, it was in Richard Nash's The Rainmaker in 3 acts. That's what it was. It wasn't risky, it wasn't this, it wasn't that. It was a damn good play. And that's what we did.
Against the Wall.
Well, there is this, that is, you're talking about something that just has almost turned my life around, that movie. I had gone through a relatively bad time in the 80s making some undistinguished movies, and we won't go into the reasons for why. It's not interesting here. And finally, I had made a movie in 1990 called The Year of the Gun, which was a good movie, with Sharon Stone, Valeria Golino, and a young man named Andrew McCarthy. Unfortunately, the producer was a total liar, and he totally misrepresented everything about the movie, including the fact that he claimed he had all this P&A money, and he didn't. P&A, I mean prints and advertising. So the movie was a very well-kept secret and went out and it did no business. Well, in the movie business, you're more or less gauged on what your movie does at the box office, and my reputation wasn't too good anyway at that point. So the phone literally didn't ring for like a year and a half. And I had pretty well committed to do this movie that I was going to do for the money with a very mediocre actor. Against all my better judgment, I was going to do it, but I needed the money. And the phone rang. And it was this young man, Jonathan Axelrod, who was George's son, who I had taken to Hungary in 1968 when he was 16. Because his parents were having some problems with him, and I put him to work, and really, I guess that experience turned his life around because he had been head of programming for ABC, he had been a very successful agent, and now he was a very successful producer. And he called me and said, look, he said, I know you don't do television, but I have a script that I think you would be perfect for, that's wonderful. And there's no budget, nothing. But I wish you'd read it for HBO, would you? So I said, yes, I would. And I read the script. And I loved it. But again, I mean, the money was about 1/8 of what I got for a feature film. And the budget was $5 million total, and however many days you had to shoot it to get to that. So I called this friend of mine who I have a lot of confidence in, and I said, you know, I've just been offered this great script, but it's for television, and there's no money in for me, nothing. I think I should turn it down. And he said, you should. He said, you should. And then you know what you should do? He said, you should sit by the phone, you should wait for it to ring, and think about the good old days. So I picked up the phone, I called Jonathan Axelrod and said I'd love to do it. So then I had to go in and meet Bob Cooper, who didn't want me, who was head of HBO, because he thought I'd be too expensive, because he thought I might be condescending toward cable vis-a-vis feature films. But Cooper and I talked, and Hutch Parker was one of the executives, and he was very helpful. And Axelrod was very helpful. And at the end of the conversation, Cooper said, let's just go do it. So it was a question of shooting it in 30 days, which we had to do, on a location that I really didn't want to be at the beginning, because I thought there was a better location somewhere else. And we just went ahead and did it, and we got real lucky. We got a great group of actors, Kyle MacLachlan, Sam Jackson, Anne Heche, Clarence Williams III, and the script by Ron Hutchison was brilliant. And I just decided I'm just going to let it all out here. Because if I'm ever going to reinvent myself, it's going to be here. And I went for very, very daring camera angles. I really souped up the pace to the point where, I made the stakes very high. I mean, there already were. It was a prison riot, one of the most famous in history. And Frederick Forrest was in that picture. He was brilliant. And we really went for it. We really went for it. And went back and cut it together. Expected all kinds of interference from HBO, because I'd heard that they did that. But I was willing to fight for what I believed in. Bob Cooper looked at the movie and said, release it. Had no notes. And they did. And then they were going to wait a long time to put it on the air. I was trying to get a feature. And I couldn't really get one. And then about 4 months later, Cooper said, I've got this very tough movie in Mexico about Chico Mendes, which I had wanted to do so much. And I didn't want to shoot in Mexico. But I was kind of told that if I didn't shoot in Mexico, they were going to get another director to do it. So I went to Mexico and I made The Burning Season with Raul Julia. And in the meantime, The Burning Against the Wall was released. We finished The Burning Season. And The Burning Season was going to be released going to air on a Monday or on a Saturday. And the Sunday before the Saturday that it was supposed to air, I won the Emmy for Against the Wall. And then Ethel Wynett, my friend from Playhouse 90 and from All Fall Down, because she worked on that movie with John Houseman. I hadn't seen her in 25 years. She called me out of the blue and said, we have this script called Andersonville that we really want you to do, by David Rintells. I read the script and I thought the script needed a lot of work, and I knew how much work I would have to do it. And I said, Ethel, I don't really want to do this. The prisoner of war camp, I mean, it's bleak. I just don't think I want to do it. Beside that, I'm not available. I'm going to go do The Burning Season. This was before I left for Mexico. And she said, well, we really want you to do it. And anyway, to make a long story short, she told me that she would hold the picture for me until after I finished The Burning Season.
Was it always originally with TNT?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so that was an offer I couldn't refuse, because I went from one to the other. And that's what I did. And when I did Andersonville, and it was a wonderful cast again, and TNT was very, very supportive. And
in a way, another prison movie.
Another prison movie,
It's
yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
And
Anyway.
what's remarkable about that movie, I saw it recently, was how each character was so individualized, and you got to know them almost immediately.
Yeah, it was hard. It was really hard. A lot of it has to do with the superb actors. Rintells did a good job on the script. He did a lot of rewriting, but he did a good job. And Ethel was an example for everybody. I mean, here's this infirm woman, and she's sitting out there in the cold, and she was really an example for everybody. It was a happy experience, in spite of the fact that it was a miserable movie to make. We were in the mud and the rain. And I came back to California, cut it together, and then went and did The Island of Dr. Moreau for New Line as a feature film, and had a hideous, horrible experience on that. And then came back and had one of the best experiences of my life, which was doing George Wallace for TNT with Gary Sinise.
How did that come about?
Well, it came about because they had asked me to do that while I was doing Andersonville. And I had read a very good script, and my problem with it was, how do you cast it? And do you guys really want to do this? And
because of the controversy?
Yeah. And then Gary Sinise and I met in preparation for a feature that neither one of us made. And I said, Gary, I've got this script that you should do. And he had just done Truman, and he said, I don't want to do another real-life person. and I don't want to do television. And we were able to overcome that. I think my persistence more than anything did it. And the rest of it, as they say, is history. I mean, it's probably one of the best movies I've ever done.
Describe the different techniques you use, the black and white handheld cameras. How did that come together?
I didn't use any handheld, very few handheld cameras in Wallace.
But the black and white sequence.
Well, I just felt that I wanted to do that period. The whole thing should have been done in black and white, but there were certain sequences that just had to be done in black and white. The confrontation at the University of Alabama, a lot of stuff. So I got the idea just to mix the black and white and the color. And when we went back into flashbacks and stuff like that, I think it worked really well. We actually shot it in black and white too.
Did?
Yeah, we did.
I was wondering if you dial up.
No, because TNT is famous for that colorization stuff. I wasn't going to let them do that. I mean, you must understand something about me, Michael, which is that I try and really do everything I can to get what I want, And in that particular case, it was do it in black and white. Boy, they can't change that. So I did.
Is it when you're confronted with resistance on an idea or a concept, is it more a matter of stating your case like a good statesman, or is it a matter of finding different ways to hit it from different angles?
It all depends on the circumstances and who you're dealing with. Sometimes a diplomatic approach is the best, and sometimes just a head-on confrontation is the best. But you have to have passion, you just have to believe what you're saying and go to any lengths to get what you want, because it's the only way it's going to be any good. You must understand that everybody on that set thinks they can do your job better than you do it, if only given the chance, And everybody wants to be a director, and if they don't want to be a director, they want to be an editor. And everybody's got an idea, But that's fine. I'll listen to most people's ideas. But at the end, the decision has to be mine as to what you do.
And I don't know that any other director that has been launched by television twice in their career. I mean, really,
Yeah.
it launched you again back in the features.
It did. But however, I don't intend to not do television. I mean, I believe in staying with the girl that brought you to the dance, And I'm going to do cable stuff again, very definitely.
So you obviously enjoy the process of both.
I love doing cable television because the subject matter is so much better than it is for feature films, really. I don't think any of those 4 cable movies that I did would have been made as a feature film, even if you had Tom Cruise. I really don't. I just don't. They were uniquely for television because they were really cutting-edge subjects. And it's not an accident that I have this shelf full of stuff that I got for it, I mean, because the scripts were so good.
And we'll change shapes and just finish up.